Hello everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing the most fun thing, and that is that we are going to be reading not only Silver Under Nightfall, but also I got approved for the arc of Court of Wanderers. Thank you so much to Saga Press and NetGalley for providing me with an e-arc of this book for review purposes. In this video starting off, I'm going to be rereading all of Silver Under Nightfall, because the first time I read this book, I listened to it as an audiobook, and I really want to go through and annotate the entirety of this book physically. And then after I'm done with that, I'm going to be switching over to reading my e-arc of Court of Wanderers. For Silver Under Nightfall, I'm definitely going to go into more spoilers, but for Court of Wanderers, I'm going to keep it relatively spoiler-free, because overall, I just really want people to read these books, and I don't want to talk about the sequel too much since it's not out yet. But let's go over the basics and talk about the plot for Silver Under Nightfall. So this is an adult fantasy horror. Our main character is Remington Pendergast, or Remy, who is a Reaper, which is a member of this vampire hunting order. Remy is the child of this really famous Reaper, Duke Valenbon, and Remy's mother died in childbirth, and she had actually been captured by members of the First Court of Vampires prior to her death. However, there was also a rumor that Remy's mother ran off with these vampires and that Remy is actually a bastard half-vampire himself, which has basically made him like a social pariah amongst the other Reapers and amongst the nobility. But also because of his mother's death, his dad has basically been turning him into a vampire hunting machine, all in pursuit of those First Court vampires that have now disappeared after the death of their king. Anyway, that's all for Remy's backstory. The actual story starts out with Remy and the rest of the Reaper organization learning about this new breed of more animalistic zombie-like vampires that they call the Rot. Also, as part of a new alliance that is coming up between their country of Illyria and the vampire courts, the leaders of the third and fourth courts, who are the vampire couple of Zidane Malik and Xiaodan Song, have come to help work with the Reapers to deal with this new breed of vampire. And through like a couple different circumstances, Remy ends up meeting with Zidane and Xiaodan, and then ends up becoming the Reaper liaison who's going to travel with them to figure out how the rot is spreading and who is behind it. So with that set up, let's get into reading this book. Okay, I thought as a good first step, we could go through some of my tabs for my reread. I also have already changed my front cover with the annotation key from what I did in the original intro. I realized I wanted to tab a fourth thing and I kind of had ran out of space, so I ended up taking off the post-it note and just reorganizing them. And also kind of leaving space down here if there's other things I want to go back and tab in the future. Right now I have 4 tabs that I'm working through. The first one is this dark blue, which is for character descriptions. The next one, which is this teal color, which is for world building. Then I have this kind of like peachy pink, which is for moments I love. And lastly, I have this very pale, like white, translucent teal one, which is for Remy's trauma. Remy has like a lot of different sources of trauma in this book, and I think that those are all very essential in talking about his character development, which is definitely a thing that I really gravitated towards and liked in the first read that I did through of this book. But I wanted to go through and talk about some of my moments I love tabs. So the first one I have is like 50 pages in, and it is the scene when Remy first meets Xiaodan. Basically, Remy was at this ball, and he was kind of like humiliated in public by this noblewoman who accused him of being a vampire or like a half vampire, and he just like needed to escape and like goes out into the garden to get some like fresh air and kind of like clear his head. And while he's sitting down, he notices a girl in a tree who comes down to talk to him and realizes that she's a vampire. And they're just like kind of making small talk and being friendly with one another. She doesn't introduce herself at first, but kind of just like says that she can tell that Remy is upset and like kind of offers him some words of advice. And she basically says whenever she feels frustrated, she will climb to the highest tower she can find and scream into the wind. And as like an alternative to that, they basically have like a swear off where they're both saying these like absolutely ridiculous fake swear words, like yelling them out to try and like vent all of their frustration. And it kind of is just showing like how Zhao Dan can kind of match Remy's energy and how well they like play off together, because Remy is definitely like starting to crush on her even after this first scene. But then right after that, Zidane shows up and Remy's like, fuck, this was a trap. She was just like luring me in so this other vampire could kill me. And then he also realizes that Zidane is a vampire that he met in the very first chapter of the book. And from that previous encounter, they kind of have an antagonistic relationship with each other. But from Zidane showing up, Remy ends up learning who Zhao Dan is and realizes that she's one of the vampires from the Fourth Court that has come to form the alliance with their government. And realizing that Zhao Dan and Zidane are a couple, Remy starts to back off a little. The next scene I really enjoy is a couple of chapters later, and it's when Remy and LK, who is a character I haven't talked about yet, she is another vampire that originally came from the Fifth Court. Remy found her when she was hurt, or like when she was just like going between different villages trying to pass herself off as a human. Instead of killing her, Remy ends up taking her in and helping her get set up in Alouve, which is the capital city that Remy lives in. She's been passing herself off as a human and also is a blacksmith, and is kind of like a recurring favor for Remy, is the person that's been helping him fix his weapons. Anyway, she ends up going with him to the small town where there was a sighting of one of the rot-infested vampires. And I really enjoy the first scene when you see the rot in action, because it's just like such a gross description for what the monster is like. It's kind of this vaguely human shape that is also very like mangled and twisted, and its skin is starting to like flake off and turn into a sludge. It's a really gross description and very like effective horror, and I really like the fight scene that Remy and LK have with it after that. Again, one of the rare times where the action scenes in the book actually are very interesting to me. Okay, the next scene I have is around page 105, and it's when Remy has been accused of killing the High Steward, and he's being like held for questioning. Again, the Reaper organization is very like stacked against him, because they're all pretty convinced he's either a full vampire or a half vampire because of what his mother had done. And there's also just naturally an antagonistic relationship with everyone that was aligned with the High Steward, because the High Steward and Remy's dad are not on good terms. Anyway, Remy has been held in a cell without any like food or water, and Zhao Dan shows up and basically yells at the guards to let him go. I really like how Zhao Dan is vouching for Remy. And also in this part, there is one of the other lords who calls Remy Lord Pendergast, and Zhao Dan corrects him to use the term armiger. I kind of missed this, but it's actually mentioned in the very first page of the book, the fact that Remy prefers using armiger over lord and lady. Armiger is a term that means arms bearer, and again, it's like the gender neutral version of lord or lady. And it's implied that Remy is using that because he doesn't really identify with either of the other terms, and thus is more non-binary. Again, he uses he, him in the story, which is why I'm referring to as he, him. So basically anytime someone uses lord over armiger, they're kind of misgendering him. And I really like this scene because it shows Zhao Dan kind of sticking up for him and correcting people by telling them to use armiger instead of using lord. Okay, the next scene I have is when Zhao Dan, Zidane, and Remy are going down to the archives, which is basically where all of the fantasy fake science R&D is going on for the Reaper organization. And they've been experimenting on some of the rot-infested vampires. Most of the corpses are in suspended animation, but there is one that they've been calling a colossus, which is kind of like the final stage of what the rot can become. And Zhao Dan is basically going to go in alone and use her Sunbringer powers to destroy this one. And I just like all of the scene. I like all of like the fake science, fantasy R&D stuff that's going on. And then Zhao Dan deciding to go in alone to face this one monster. Okay, the next time I have, I think, is from like 2 or 3 chapters later. And this is when Remy, Zhao Dan, and Zidane are going to meet the Queen. And they're doing this because Zhao Dan wants to advocate on Remy's behalf to have him be kind of like the diplomat slash delegate who's going to work as the in-between between the vampire courts and Illyria. And basically the Queen is like, why do you want Remy specifically? And Zhao Dan basically goes through it and gives like a huge laundry list of all of Remy's accomplishments, and basically saying how he has been falsely like forced out of the Reaper organization because of some prejudices that were held by the former High Steward, and how the former High Steward was basically taking all of Remy's accomplishments as his own. And Remy is like completely floored by this because he's never had someone to like advocate on his behalf. Remy has kind of been resigned to the fact that he is just going to get all of the really shitty assignments, do them, and then like get like very little of the credit for them. So now that there's the fact that there is this woman who he's just met who kind of like knows his entire history and is willing to really stick her neck out for him is like really shocking to him. And I really just love Xiaodan in this scene as well as the scene where she gets him out of jail. It's showing that she kind of is able to like manipulate situations to her benefit, and how she has a very like forceful personality, but at the same time is very like sweet and respectful, so that people kind of like naturally capitulate to her. Okay, we're getting up to about the spot where I currently reread in this book, which is in the middle of chapter 15. And the part that I marked here is basically Xiaodan and Zidane are now taking Remy with them to go back to Changshui, which is the seat of the fourth court, which is where Xiaodan is originally from. And along the way, they're going to go through a couple different villages that have also been having sightings of the rot-infested vampires. But the way they're going to get there is they're going to ride in a carriage that is being drawn by 2 vampire horses. And I really like this line here where Xiaodan is talking. Zidane calls them hellhests. I call them Peanut and Cookie. I just really love the fact that there are these really like horrifying vampire horses, and Xiaodan decided to give them really cutesy names. I'm pretty sure there's other vampire horses we meet a little later on that also have cutesy names. I just really like that touch, and I think it's such a sweet aspect of Xiaodan's personality. So that is all of the progress I've made with my tabbing so far. I think I'm a little under halfway, and there's definitely a lot more of my favorite scenes coming up. So I'll definitely do another update when I've gotten through more of them. But so far, reread is going great. I'm really enjoying it just as much the second time around as I did the first. There's definitely a lot more plot points also early on that I've been tabbing, now that I know kind of the direction that the story goes in. And overall, I still really, really love this book. So it's been a couple days, and I definitely have made a lot more progress in this. I did end up adding another tab and kind of changing what my original tab colors meant. I ended up changing the world building tab to be this like lighter pink one, and then this original teal tab I'm kind of using specifically for stuff that's related to the rot or the first court, because that is kind of like the central like antagonistic force and the overall like main goal of the story, if that makes sense. Whereas the world building I'm kind of just doing for like character background, kind of setup of what is going on with the different like countries. And I feel like having it all in one tab was making it a little bit more confusing. And I just kind of wanted to separate it out into 2 different tabs. I'm trying to remember where I left off when I last talked to you guys. I think it was the introduction of Peanut and Cookie. And I also was incorrect. It's not that they have 2 more vampire horses. They have 2 vampire dogs that are named Candy and Vanilla, which is so adorable. But let's go through now and talk about some of the other tabs I've added in for my favorite scenes. I actually haven't done too many, although I definitely have a lot of tabs I have added. The first one, oh my gosh, I feel like quite a few of the tabs I have going forward are some of the more like spicy aspects of the book. The first one is obviously when Remy kind of walks in on Xiaodan feeding from Zidane, and him being very much like deer in headlights, not sure what he should do. And then Xiaodan and Zidane like whispering to each other, kind of revealing that they both are interested in Remy, and him immediately like fleeing the scene because he's so like nervous about it. We then have a scene where Remy and Zidane are training, and this is definitely peak like bickering enemies to lovers, because Remy just thinks that he is very like annoyed by Zidane, and it's a little bit of he can't really decide if he wants to be the man or be with the man, which is just so good. Jumping forward like a lot of pages, the next scene that I tabbed as one of my favorite scenes is when they kind of like consummate their relationship and end up giving some of their blood to Remy so that he can heal after he was attacked by all of these vampires. I feel like this is definitely the like definitive moment when all 3 of them start coalescing as a throuple. Although it is still kind of under like dire circumstances, so Remy does feel a little bit like unsure about if he's really welcome to join their relationship. But I think by the end of like the next chapter is when they like actually like all join together as a throuple. Here is how far I am right now. I'm about to start chapter 27, which is called Again. And this is definitely like one of my favorite chapters in the whole book. I both love like the way it's written, where each like scene change is started with the word again. But each of the scenes that they cut to is just kind of like a different moment of them living in domestic bliss, or as close to domestic bliss as you can get when you're trying to hunt down a group of vampire zombies and also doing experiments on blood to try and figure out what is the root cause of all the vampire zombies, and also when the domestic bliss is when you're in a relationship with 2 other vampire lords. But yes, I'm very pleased with my progress so far. I think definitely my favorite sections of the book are the very beginning when they're kind of all being introduced to each other, and then this middle section we're in right now when they're staying at Zhao Dan's family home of Changshui. As soon as they leave there and go back to Illyria, I feel like the last section of the book is definitely my least favorite, just because of some of the stuff that happens in the final fight scene. But I am getting a little bit ahead of myself, so I will talk about that when I get to that section of the book. Anyway, that is my update for right now, and I will talk to you guys in a little bit. I have now finished Silver Under Nightfall, but I actually decided I don't think I'm going to go through any more elements of this book because I don't have too many more favorite scene tabs to talk about, and I kind of feel like spoiling the biggest reveal of this book would kind of like do a disservice from encouraging you guys to read it. So instead now I wanted to move over and talk about my review for Court of Wanderers. I'm going to keep this one entirely spoiler free, although I will mention a couple things that happen in the very first chapter because those are included in the paperback release of this, so I feel like they're kind of free game to talk about. Court of Wanderers starts off immediately after the very dramatic ending that Silver Under Nightfall left off on, and we kind of end up wasting no time resolving some of the issues that had happened in the previous book, and then jumping into a full-on war with the Night Court. This book does move very fast early on, but I think then settles into a pace that works perfectly for the story. One thing that I do really wish is that this book had a map, because I'm one of those people that fantasy names and like locations tend to go in one ear and out the other, and having a map would be really helpful to like kind of ground myself in the story early on, to kind of see where we've come from and also where we are going, and also to mark out the locations that previous events happened in. This book overall is focused more on world building and the vampire court drama compared to the previous book, which I think Silver Under Nightfall focuses much more on Remy's character and like establishes his dynamics with both Zhao Dan and Zidan as a throuple. At the same time though, I feel like Court of Wanderers does focus on more of like common romantasy world building tactics that make some aspects of the book have a more like silly goofy tone to them, and I think because of that it made me take it a little less seriously than I did the first book. But at the same time, I don't come to fantasy for realism, so it's mostly fine. However, with that shifted focus, there still is plenty of scenes with all of the characters that I love. They really are the heart of the series to me overall. In Court of Wanderers, Remy definitely feels a lot more self-assured and has gone through a lot of character growth, which we love to see. And I feel like overall the sequel made me realize how much I love Zhao Dan. She really steals the show for me and like brightens up every scene that she's in. I know, really living up to her role as the sun incarnate. Overall, I really enjoyed this sequel. Even though I do believe this book was set up to be a duology, I really at the same time think that it could easily become a trilogy, especially since the first book has Remy on the cover and the second book has Zidan on the cover, and I feel like we really need a third book so that Zhao Dan also gets her own cover. And there definitely were a couple elements in the story that was left to be a little bit more open-ended, so I could see them being elaborated on in a third book. I just feel like the vampire hunting trio of Remy, Zhao Dan, and Zidan do lend themselves well to having a more like Monster of the Week type of formula for oncoming books. I could also see maybe some novellas or maybe a short story collection that focused on some of the other characters and their relationships that get established throughout the series. Maybe that's a little bit of wishful thinking, especially since I love Elke so much and I obviously would love to see more of her in other books as well. But overall, that is my review for Court of Wanderers. I think overall I'm going to give this a 4.5 stars, but I feel like for a lot of people it might also be a 5-star. It just kind of, for me, this book is like the pinnacle of excellence, so it's like, can you really improve on perfection? So I feel like no matter what happened in Court of Wanderers, I was kind of always primed to like it a little bit less than Silver Under Nightfall. And that is going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video has fully influenced you to read the Reaper duology. I really love both these books so much. I proselytized about them to all of my friends in real life as well. So if you end up reading this book, please feel free to leave a comment here or messaging me on Instagram or Tumblr so we can talk about them. If you guys enjoyed this video, also consider leaving a like or subscribing if you aren't already. Interacting with this video in any way is really helpful for me as a small channel to get put into the algorithm, and I'm really happy with some of the growth I've had on my channel as of late. So I'd really like to keep that going and have more people join this channel in the near future. But that is going to be it from me. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!